Watch this.
The Senate is adjourned. Sine die.
We made it. It's over. We're going to detail what worked and what didn't, and the drama of the 2024 legislative session.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great bill.
But if anybody wants to bring an easy-to-win lawsuit, that's the one.
We thought we'd ask the Republicans their thoughts on that drama, and surprise, it was much different than what their Democratic counterparts had to say. A drama that included the governor signing controversial bills, including waiting to the last day to codify the library bill. He said it was much different than the one he vetoed last year. But how much different?
The Senate is adjourned. Sine die.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. I'm surprised. The motion passes and the House is now adjourned. Sine die.
There it is, sine die. And on the 94th day, they rested. The 2024 regular legislative session is in the books, with hundreds of new laws now on the books, from funding school facilities to extending contraception a few more months to preventing people from using preferred pronouns. And coming soon, Idaho libraries will soon be able to be sued over what books they have on their shelves. Governor Brad Little ended the mystery of will he or won't he this morning by signing House Bill 710, the Children's School and Library Protection Act. This bill, now law, gives parents the means to file a complaint with a library about a book they find objectionable in the kids section. The library has 60 days to relocate it, or if they believe it's in the proper section, they can leave it there. And a parent can then sue for $250 and other damages, with no limit on those other damages. So libraries have until July 1st to figure out what they're going to do with any material some might consider questionable. And it's a long list filled mostly with books with LGBTQ plus subjects. Do libraries remove all such books completely? Do they just block off sections of the library? Or do they install cameras to make sure books aren't mistakenly placed in the wrong section? Those are all things we've talked about while covering this topic over the last 3 legislative sessions. House Bill 710 was the 5th attempt at regulating library books. And despite the overwhelming numbers of Idahoans asking the governor to not sign it into law, 7,150 emails and phone calls versus 4,251 in favor. Despite those numbers, Governor Little made it law. In his transmittal letter, Governor Little wrote, House Bill 710 this year addresses most, but not all of the concerns he outlined in his veto letter last year, pointing out the drop in bounty from $2,500 to $250 and the 60-day time frame for librarians to address a concern. Most, but not all, could mean the first sentence of the 3rd paragraph from last year's veto explanation. About House Bill 314, he wrote, my main concern is that the bill's ambiguity will have unintended consequences for Idaho libraries and their patrons. This legislation makes sweeping blanket assumptions on materials that could be determined as, quote, harmful to minors, end quote, in a local library, and it will force an interpretation of that phrase onto all the patrons of that library. House Bill 710, Governor Little wrote today, tightens the definition of what is considered harmful to minors. Does it, though? Because under the section harmful to minors, this year's bill contains the exact phrasing as last year's bill, word for word, from definitions of obscene materials to what is harmful to minors, which includes any act of homosexuality. Both bills even contained some semblance of the Miller test, which is what the Supreme Court said should be used to determine whether something is obscene or not the I know it when I see it definition. Critics point out House Bill 710 only includes 2 of the 3 prongs of the Miller test. The appeals to the prurient interest, the depictions or describes are patently offensive, but not the taken as a whole lacks value thing. That part was kind of, well, hidden in the bill, if included at all. So the ambiguity of the bill having unintended consequences, as Little wrote last year, the sweeping assumptions on what is harmful to minors, what one parent considers harmful could determine what you consider harmful. Governor Little's main concern from last year's bill, those things didn't change, at all. Governor Little wrapped up his letter of explanation with this. Like many Idahoans, I'll be watching the implementation and outcomes of this legislation very closely. Critics and librarians have already made it clear implementation will be difficult, and the outcomes, well, they're going to likely be less access to some literature. Okay, so what else will be watched when it comes to implementation and outcomes of legislation? For that, we're going to bring in Joe Paris and Andrew Bartline, who have been covering all that is going on at the State House these past 3+ months. And of course, each side of the chamber, each side of the aisle has a different take on how they think things went this session. So, Joe, we're going to start with you, okay? With this post-Sine Die perspective, the winners and the losers here.
Sine die, if you may. Okay, so in terms of accomplishments, the Idaho GOP, we'll start with them. Across the board, they are thrilled with House Bill 521. Originally, that was pitched by Governor Little, and that was the massive package that includes investments into school facilities, tax cuts, and as a result of all of it, property tax relief. And Governor Little, he pitched the idea on day one, and a lot of people were wondering what this would actually look like in the end. I asked House Speaker Mike Moyle this afternoon if he thinks that this final law matches the original concept.
Yeah, it does. You know, we said we were going to do some income tax relief. It's in the bill. We said we were going to do some property tax. It's in the bill. And it's ongoing. And we said we were going to use some of the sales tax revenue to pay for some buildings. And every school district gets that money based on how many students they have attending school. So, no, yeah, it's great. It's a great bill.
Okay, so this whole it's in the bill, this thing covered a lot of ground. This one particular bill, some people refer to it as the Go Home bill. We heard it referred to on the Senate floor as the Christmas tree bill for all its lights and decorations that were included in this thing. But more accurately, I guess, it could be described as this see you in court bill, right, Andrew?
Yeah, and we'll get to that. That's part of the perception of the Democrats and even some Republicans, too. Some people question how this exactly appeals to the single interest piece that legislation is supposed to fall into. But typically, the Democrats are not ones to complain about funding for school facilities. Governor Brad Little said in his State of the State that he wants $2 billion invested over the next decade. And 521 is not going to fulfill that full appetite. But the Dems, again, are more concerned with how it's constructed. Legislation is supposed to have a single subject, and the variety in 521 is a problem if someone chooses to make it one.
Even frankly, the school facilities bill is flagrantly unconstitutional. It clearly violates the single subject rule. I think they're just counting on nobody suing. But if anybody wants to bring an easy to win lawsuit, that's the one. I see no scenario in which that survives constitutional challenge. So those are just the smattering. But yeah, we gave a lot of fodder to the lawyers by passing illegal and unconstitutional laws this year.
For a lawsuit to be filed, you have to have an injured party. So I guess we'll wait to see if somebody files a complaint on that. In the meantime, we know that there are plenty of other laws the Democrats openly opposed this session.
Yeah, and the reality of that specifically, the minority party plays defense on a lot of pieces of legislation. They oppose the no public funds for gender transition. They oppose the regulations of libraries Brian just spoke about, and then further restrictions on the initiative process with paid signature gatherers. But Rebel was quick to boast some Democratic wins as well, with a nod to working across the aisle.
We stayed true to our word. We were focused on real issues that benefit real people. Housing, for one thing, making sure we have protections for renters with Senator Robbie's bill. Facilitating in-home daycare, really important given the child crisis we have. I had some bills I was very excited about in terms of addressing our fentanyl crisis by legalizing test strips, addressing deep fakes in elections, trying to make sure we have integrity in our elections by protecting against deep fake impersonations. We feel that the best bills are the bipartisan bills, and often it's a Democrat kind of driving the bill, but we will bring along a Republican co-sponsor, and we greatly appreciate their participation in the process and their help, and we couldn't do it without them.
On the other side of that, the Republicans can get a lot done without the Democrats' help because there's not too many of them there. Okay, so what about what didn't get done this session, Joe?
It's interesting because it's something that's been talked about for years. And honestly, if we were to come into the session in January and say, what is the one thing that gets done? A lot of you would have an education-related thought. But certainly, yes, things the majority party wanted didn't get done. And I asked Speaker Moyle about what sticks out. No surprises with his answer.
I'd like to get the school choice issue resolved. We've had that debate the last 2 years, and I was hoping we could find a path forward on that this year. And, you know, that issue's not going to go away. We need to find a solution. And that's one that I wish we could have found a solution to. We'll get the groups together. Something will happen on that next year. We'll get that resolved. And there'll be a lot of debate on that. But I think if everybody will come together, we can find a path that everybody agrees to that will help our students and our families, not hurt the schools, and that everybody can be happy with. And that's the goal.
Okay, so you may be watching and say, hold on a second, Joe. A few weeks ago, you said a new piece of legislation was just put into committee with school vouchers. That is correct. And I asked Speaker Moyle about that. It was his legislation. He said that will be the blueprint moving into next year. So we will see how that flies.
First one's already on the table. All right. Okay, so the only thing the legislature is legally required to do is leave the session with a balanced budget, pass all the budgets. In every session lately, it seems it's been a budget that's been, well, keeping them hanging around longer than they likely intended. This year, It was the Idaho Transportation Department budget. What happened with that?
Okay, so as you may recall, the ITD budget was very controversial, not really because of what was in it, but actually the language, the intent language. There was language in the bill that said, well, we're going to kill the sale of the State Street campus in Boise. So one of two really big questions coming into the day. We know the library bill is signed, but the ITD budget, it went into law without Governor Little's signature. And some lawmakers liked the decision. Others wondered if this is going to hurt Idaho's reputation in terms of doing business. But House Speaker Mike Moyle, he shared his thoughts, and he's more concentrated on what was in the bill.
Hey, that bill had a lot of money for roads. And if you've seen the growth around this state right now, what's happening, we need that money. We need that money on the roads. And so I was glad it became the law. And it has the money necessary to do a lot of projects around the Treasure Valley and every part of the state, actually. And so, no, I'm glad there, and also has some rural money for bridges, $200 million there for our friends throughout rural Idaho. So it's a good bill, and I'm glad it's law.
Okay, so that's, well, I mean, that's their determination. Obviously, you're getting different sides of this because the Democratic side of this is kind of more concerned about the long-term effects of passing this ITD budget, which kills the sale of the State Street complex.
Yeah, kind of regardless of whether it's a good deal or not, the Democrats are sort of in this position of it's a deal that you made. Blocking that ITD building sale, they say, is bad for the state's reputation. And that's not a uniquely Democratic take. There are some Republicans that felt that way too. And the state originally did agree to a deal. And Rebel says they should follow through with that deal. And the governor appealing to both sides and letting it to become law without his signature, it didn't mean a whole lot to her.
So I think we're setting a really dangerous precedent by just saying everything is on shifting sands. You might think you have a deal, but if that deal is with the state, all bets may be off the second this legislature walks in the building. We're going to get worse deals. We might have a hard time finding anybody who wants to do deals with the government if this is our method of doing business.
And with the block sale, Representative Rebel is right. Private business and developers have told us that it does hurt the state's reputation, their willingness to work with the state. We now have a statement from the winning bid who's supposed to buy that building, and we can throw it up for you right now. They say, we're obviously extremely disappointed in the passage of this legislation. This governmental overreach is a massive waste of taxpayer dollars, and we're confident the courts will agree this kind of legislative interference in the free market violates the state constitution. We will be exploring legal action. So long translation, Brian, we will see you in court.
And that could be the case for a couple of other bills. And I was thinking specifically about the sex gender synonymous or synonym bill. That's the one that makes those two synonymous. That one could end up in court soon if they just have fined an injured party, because that one has been proven to be, well, I guess, legal issues in other states when it comes to this. Okay, so this whole idea of not signing this bill and just kind of letting it become law, it's not a first time, obviously, but what's your take on this, Joe?
I think when I speak to lawmakers down at the State House, and I was speaking to a handful of Republicans after it came out, they told me, we're not surprised, and we understand why the governor did this. At the same time, though, I did hear from Democrats that say, and kind of what Andrew alluded to, is if you're going to make a statement, make one. So at the same time, though, there are those I've spoken with in the State House, and we'd have to ask the governor for his opinion on this, because he's the one that made these decisions. But kind of the word I'm hearing is, look, the governor didn't see it as his place to come in and take this giant action, clearly, because he didn't. There is a conversation, though, about the line item veto power that the governor did have.
Yeah, he does have that, I believe, with budgets, with appropriations bills, no other bill, but just those.
So we'll find out, I guess, if we'll hear from the governor hopefully in the coming days or next week about his process here. But I can tell you there's plenty of people down at the State House that were talking about that, and they found it very interesting that the governor, I mean, he made no action, and that is an action.
It is true. All right.
Same result.
Same result.
Yeah.
But different political points.
If Rebel was inclined to believe that. She seemed not in, it didn't win any favor with the Dems, I would say.
Yeah. Anyways, election next month, so we'll see what happens with all this.
All right, thank you, Joe and Andrew, for all of your coverage. You guys have done this very well throughout these 3+ months. I really appreciate it.
We got to do regular news now.
Yeah, we're gonna find some stuff.
Yeah, send us your story pitches. Also, Brian, you dug in too, so don't give us the credit.
Well, anyway,
dug in.
Speaking of digging in, let's talk about some numbers. Now that the dust is settling, and still kind of settling, on the second session of the 67th Idaho legislature, this might be the time to break it down by some of the numbers. In 94 days, lawmakers introduced 634 bills, and that doesn't include the dozens of concurrent and joint resolutions and memorials. More bills came from the House side of the State House than on the Senate side, making this session one of the most, all right, let's think about which word should we use here? Prolific, abundant, generative? How about one of the most fertile sessions in recent history? Not as many as 2021, but more than last year and in 2022 and in 2020. 10 years ago, only 540 bills were introduced. 20 years ago, 617. So it seems like just shy of 600 seems to be the average when it comes to session bills. 330 of those bills were sent to the governor's office for his consideration this session, and he considered them all, signing all but 4 into law. 2 he vetoed. 2 others, as we already mentioned, he allowed to become law without his signature, including the aforementioned ITD budget. Governor Little also let 2 bills become law without his signature 2 years ago, both of them having to do with pay raises for himself and other state officials, so he kind of wanted to step out of that one. One last number for you as we leave this beginning, or I should say end of the beginning of the show. We're now just 209 days until the November election, when all seats in the legislature are up for grabs. Well, if there's one way you don't want being chased by police to end, there's probably several ways, but we'll just talk about one. It's probably by crashing into a police car. But the suspect probably didn't know any better. He's only 13. That, plus opening statements of the Chad Daybell trial in today's 411.
He made sure that no person or no law would stand in his way.
Opening statements in the first day of witness testimony in Chad Daybell's murder trial wrapped up earlier today. The Eastern Idaho man is accused of murder and conspiracy in the deaths of his late wife, Tammy Daybell, and his current wife's 2 children, JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan. The prosecution described the case in 3 words: money, power, sex. The same words they used for Lori Vallow Daybell's trial last spring. She was found guilty on all counts. The defense blamed Lori and her dead brother Alex Cox. The trial will likely last 8 to 10 weeks. A 13-year-old was arrested after a car chase in Boise around 6:30 last night. The police say witnesses reported seeing a vehicle being driven recklessly on Fairview Avenue. When officers tried to pull the car over, it took off speeding and running red lights. Officers learned the car was stolen and identified the driver as a 13-year-old. Officers say they followed the car into a parking lot near Milwaukee and Fairview. The driver then tried to get out of the parking lot, but crashed into a Boise police car. The 13-year-old was taken into custody, along with 2 other juvenile passengers. No one was injured. Fruitland Mayor Brian Howell has resigned effective immediately, according to Fruitland City Attorney Stephanie Bonney. She says Howell resigned due to health reasons. Howell had been mayor since 2018. City Council President Carrie Peterson will be acting mayor until City Council appoints a new one. If you're around the Fort Boise Wildlife Management area near Parma tomorrow and see a fire, don't worry. Firefighters with the Idaho Department of Lands will be working on a prescribed burn. They plan to burn about 96 acres of marsh to control noxious weeds within reedgrass. That's the 411 on the 208. I'm Andrew Bartline.
if I had to sum up what we're seeing outside today, it reminds me a lot of Goldilocks because the conditions outside, it's not too hot, not too cold, kind of just right in the 60s in a lot of valley locations. We've got sunshine and a little bit of a light breeze in some areas as well. So you can see hardly a cloud in the sky looking towards the Boise Mountains. And you can see a little bit of snow at the top, but we are definitely seeing a lot less snow as we see the warming temperatures, even the mountains above the freezing mark. And so we'll continue to see the snow melt there, while in the valleys we're enjoying more of those mild temperatures, almost getting to 70 degrees over in Ontario for the high temperatures today, but otherwise right in the lower 60s. And now as we look forward for the next 48 hours, overall the conditions will still be quite pleasant. We've got warming temperatures tomorrow, but then we'll start to see some changes as we go towards the later evening hours of Thursday with some isolated showers. Then more of the widespread changes start to come in the form of showers and thunderstorms Friday afternoon and evening. So in general, as we look at tomorrow, again, mostly on the pleasant side, we get close to 75 degrees for valley locations. Magic Valley areas will be a little bit on the cooler side in comparison to the valley areas. But as we look to the mountains, you can see, again, looking on the comfortable side, getting close to 60 degrees, but a little bit more cloud cover for those areas. But as we look to Thursday night, you can see how widely scattered those showers are going to be, more on the isolated side. But then as we go forward and look at what's going on Friday, you can see some of those thunderstorms starting to pop up maybe around 2 or 3 in the afternoon, depending on how that daytime heating goes. But then you can see a lot more of those popping up. So we'll continue to be tracking the chances for some of those thunderstorms, but again, mainly on Friday. So enjoy the beautiful weather we have in the meantime.
Let's get to your comments today. This one on the sale of the ITD building, or the refusal of that building being sold. By refusing to allow that sale, local taxes will not be collected on a possible development. I wonder if that was factored in. I bet not, says Kurt in Boise. Libraries will never be the same. Sadly, the governor would rather not listen to most Idahoans. We didn't want him to sign the bill. Party over people again. Legislators and their governor showed us who they really are, says BNB. Isn't Governor Little's whole platform based on education? And he's banning books that have already been approved by publishers. Yeah, he did mention that, even in his transmittal letter, how much, it's what he stood for. And it stood for education, and saying that exactly in his transmittal letter. I don't have time to read the whole thing to you, but he did point that out and said he's conflicted with it, yet he signed it based on that. Thank you, Governor Little, for almost standing up against a bill that addresses most but not all of the concerns he outlined in his veto letter last year, proving once again doing your job halfway is all you have to do for your constituents, says Christine in Meridian. Governor Little is going to watch the library bill. How does that matter after he's already signed it into law? Sad that he caved to the far rights again, says Dale in Boise. When I was a kid, I read a lot of stories about witchcraft, ghosts, other paranormal stuff. Am I a Satanist? Did that make you a witch? No, they were good stories. Too bad kids won't have access to some good writing, says Karen in Garden City. Not the last chapter in this story for sure. We'll check in with some libraries as we get further on as this bill becomes law in July.